feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, you ready to take a trip to Asteroid City?
Oh, baby, am I. Yes, today we are reviewing Wes Anderson's Asteroid City, which will be released in limited release Friday, June the 16th. So we don't know the exact theaters, but it's probably playing Varsity in Toronto, I'm guessing right now. And then it'll be in wide release the following Friday, which would be June the 20-something. I'm bad with math.
It's 24th?
24th. I think you're right, Eric. Thank you. No, 23rd. There 23rd. We go. Now
always a day off.
We're good. So on 23rd, it'll be in a wider release around the US and Canada. So as this is out right now, it's in limited release, might not be in your area. So we're going to do things quick, spoiler-free kind of thoughts on Asteroid City. And then we'll move into a spoiler territory later where if you've seen the movie, you can stick around. If you have to wait for it in your city, you can come back and listen to the rest after. Eric, how are you today?
I'm good, Matt. I'm good. We've been recording quite a bit, so we've gotten a little bit of a flow going on, and it's exciting to talk about another movie that I think both of us are quite enthusiastic about, and especially when it comes to the symmetry of one Wes Anderson. You can always expect certain elements to be presented in his narratives, and visually speaking, it's sumptuous to look at. The creamy kind of pastel, kind of teal colors coming together in that very 1950s aesthetic in a American desert landscape, beautifully brought to life in a way that kind of feels both artificial but still otherworldly. A lot of films like this only get made by people like Wes Anderson that have the resources but also the creative mindset in order to kind of bring their vision to the big screen. And if you're a Wes Anderson fan, I think you will get quite a bit out of it, because it does feel like every Wes Anderson movie, and we've talked about this before, where post Fantastic Mr. Fox has become a cartoon. Yeah. And I think with the Grand Budapest Hotel, you have an element of the layers upon layers, or the inverse of a Wes Anderson story coming together. And so with this, it kind of feels like you're even going deeper into the rabbit hole or the recesses of Anderson's mind with a movie that we're watching, but the movie is a play within the world of this story, but the play is also being acted out. So you're seeing these different levels of the story kind of being interpreted and reworked and playing in different sort of styles based on the characters in which they're kind of presented. And so, you have multiple people, multiple characters or a person in multiple roles. And I think that's fascinating to kind of observe. It's actually weirdly more Christopher Nolan than I was expecting. And considering Oppenheimer's coming out, there's also a reference and a visual reference to an atomic bomb blowing up in the distance in one moment. So,
which I'm sure Wes Anderson blew up an actual, bomb, just like Nolan did for Oppenheimer. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. If you're not a Wes Anderson fan, is this movie going to win you over? No. If you are a fan of him, will you enjoy this? Probably yes. And that's the simplest, criticism in every, I think, Wes Anderson movie. I mean, to a certain extent, I think both of us, French Dispatch being kind of more of an anthology film, like certain segments worked better than others, but as a whole, it didn't really, I think, work for either of us. But thankfully, this is going back to kind of the style of Wes Anderson film that it took me a while to be a Wes Anderson fan. His early stuff never really clicked with me. To varying degrees, I've enjoyed some of his earlier stuff. I've now wanted to go back and rewatch a lot of it now that I actually become one of my favorite filmmakers. And for me, it was Fantastic Mr. Fox as that turning point when he just fully embraced the kind of both literary and cartoonish nature of his films and just kind of went, you know what, this is what I love. these are the movies that I want to make. And you see a lot of elements of them in his earlier stuff. I went back and watched a bit of Royal Tenenbaums a couple days ago, and it starts as the library book being checked out, things that we've seen, whether it's a movie taking place within a book, or a character's written a book about them, or this is a play within a movie that we see, and things like that. All those kind of
framing devices
that he's used in his films. But then when it comes to the cartoonish, symmetrical nature of his films, you can see in that earlier stuff, even Tenenbaums, there's elements of those, but it's not to the extent as we've seen post Fantastic Mr. Fox, where every frame feels like it's either every frame a painting kind of thing, where it's symmetrical with pastel colors, and it is a live action cartoon. And I think there's even a couple references in this that is him blatantly going, yes, I make live action cartoons, which is like,
this is my life now.
Yeah, like R-rated live action cartoons. And I mean R-rated, not that they're like really crass or violent or anything like that, but they're very silly and playful, but have adult themes in them, and tackle maybe not the deepest of things at times. Like, some of the, stuff is maybe a little bit surface level, but his movies are so enjoyable that, and usually when people use the amount of actors as he does, it can become kind of stunt casting, which it very much is, but like, and it can become distracting. But that's also a part of a Wes Anderson movie that you come to expect now and you want. It doesn't become distracting when there's a certain actor in one shot of the film. It becomes kind of a meta joke, or things like that, or it's just a really great performance from an actor who's only in one scene and stuff like that. And it's like the best possible way of a filmmaker making a movie in his backyard with his friends. But like, it's just, for some reason, he just fully has embraced this cartoonish, playful, adult nature of all of these things. And I everything since Fox, except for maybe Moonrise Kingdom, which I didn't love on first watch, but again, I've wanted to go back because I still think it's very much similar to a lot of his later stuff. That I absolutely loved this. I think again, it's not going to win over anyone. Like, I think at this point, he's just one of those filmmakers you either love or not necessarily hate. You just might get, his style just might be exhausting to you, or you just might not vibe with it. And I think that is totally fair as well. Like, the kind of twee kind of everything, like all of these things I'm saying that are a positive, you might just kind of roll your eyes at. And I feel like that's just a subjective personal preference. But if it does vibe with you, I think it will really vibe with you. And even seeing him use some actors like Tom Hanks, which he's never worked with before, in here, is actually kind of really fun. Margot Robbie, Matt Dillon. There are obviously a ton of people he's worked with numerous times, but seeing a couple of those new people play in that Wes Anderson kind of world is a lot of fun as well. So I don't think the movie's maybe super deep or anything like that, but I don't care. Like, it's just like it's like, it's just fun to watch. Like, again, it is like a live action Saturday morning cartoon in a much different way than I compared Fast X to a live action Saturday morning cartoon. It's just that Looney Tunes kind of vibe, but like still has a commentary, even though again it's maybe surface level. But just seeing these actors kind of play dress up, and the production design and the cinematography in all of these movies, I think is really what kind of obviously stands out. And I just like the aesthetic of his movies. Like, I love chapter based storytelling, I love framing devices like that. Like, and in this, we'll get into more of that stuff you talked about, Eric, with that kind of meta layering of the play within a movie, within real life kind of thing. Like, once we get into spoiler territory, but like, I loved that framing device, and how, the play is depicted as a movie in our eyes. And then the real life is depicted almost like a play in our eyes, like in the setup way. And like, it, or how we're viewing it from the audience's perspective. So I thought all of that stuff was really kind of visually interesting. And then, but I do see the other side of it, of people who don't like his style, just thinking it's tedious, and the chapter based storytelling, but then because it's a play, the act based chapter titles and stuff like that. Like, every time one of those popped up, I love it, but like, I could see someone going, Jesus fucking Christ. Okay, I get it. Let's let's move on. So anyways, I think, long story short, I really vibe with modern Wes Anderson, and maybe I don't love this as much as something like Grand Budapest Hotel, but I still had a lot of fun with it. Okay, you want to jump into spoilers then? Let's do that.
Let's do it, Matt.
Okay, so if you haven't seen Asteroid City yet, please, pause this and come back after you've seen it, because it's definitely worth watching and getting your first reaction to it. Not that there's like a ton of spoilery stuff, but there are some things visually and stuff that I want to talk about that I think were surprising to me, at least, when I watched it. So we're gonna start spoilers in 3, 2, 1. I think we got to start with the alien, right?
Yes,
Like,
definitely. It makes a
that
deep
moment,
impact.
that moment is so great. So now that, if you're here, I hope you've seen the film, but the movie takes place is it in Nevada or in the desert in the
Yeah, in
US?
Nevada
Like,
in the
yeah.
1950s, and it's kind of, I think it was actually shot in Spain, which is very funny. But like, I think one of the my favorite parts of this, and I don't mean to sound like too much of a North American, but I kind of like that he's back in the Americana
Yeah.
context of things, and I think that was kind of missing in some of his more recent movies. Even though I love Budapest Hotel and like Isle of Dogs and things like that, but there is something about him taking the American way of life and warping it into his own vision, I think that really stands out.
Yeah. So there's halfway through the movie, or not even halfway, I think maybe in the end of the first act,
It's very
or
shocking when
something
it
like that.
happens.
Yeah. So basically, the junior stargazers are out in the desert. They're at this camp slash motel complex, and like they're doing a ceremony about this asteroid that landed in this town. I mean, aptly named Asteroid City, but like an alien ship comes down, and you're like, okay, this is funny where this is going to go. And in the opening credits, you see Jeff Goldblum as the alien. So you kind of assume at one point you're going to see the alien, but I assume it's just going to look like Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah, it's
Like,
gonna look like Jeff Goldblum from Earth Girls Are Easy when he played an
yeah.
alien Birdman in that.
Yeah, like I really just thought it was going to be, him and Thor or something too, right? Like just this kind of version of Jeff Goldblum. But in perfect Wes Anderson style, you get this very strange but funny looking stop motion animated alien come down, that pops down, grabs the asteroid, looks at them. I love the pose for the camera, and then goes back up and leaves.
He's so
And
accommodating.
it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. It's something we should have expected, but I was not expecting at all. Um, which is, I just think, one of the most surprising and funny moments in the entire film. Like, I just thought it worked perfectly. And is that perfect? I keep saying perfect. Is that great kind of blend of animation and live action that he's so great at? Like, even with his live action characters, it feels like an animated movie at times, or a cartoon. The Roadrunner killed me throughout the whole thing too. I mean, even the mountains looking like the Wile E. Coyote versus Roadrunner, like desert, right? Like it's very much of him winking at the camera of going, I get it. Yes, it's a cartoon. But not in an annoying way for me personally. Like, I think it's funny. Like, I like the little stop, or the little animated Roadrunner throughout the whole thing, dancing and going meep meep. But the alien it's just so perfect, and is that perfectly, again, I keep saying perfect, but Wes Anderson, with all the symmetry and thought put into every frame, I think it was so wonderfully done. It was really, really funny.
Yeah, I think it works perfectly because there is an element of that story, or this story that we're watching, that I think Anderson in his films has never tackled before, which is the cosmic element of
Yeah.
the world beyond our own. And so seeing his interpretation of alien life in a stop motion animation context and construction, it gives you an otherworldly quality to it that I think really works within the sci-fi confounds. Like even the ship, the way that the ship is kind of almost like a glass chandelier, it has kind of a miniature kind of style to it. And even you mentioned the kind of the Rocky Mountains. It almost looks like matte paintings at times, where like everything is drawn in the distance and created as a backdrop. So it adds this really fascinating artifice to the play within a story, and I think that that really is so much fun to kind of watch him delve further into both the live action and animated, as you mentioned, but also dealing with the emotions that he's normally kind of, especially with loss, when it comes to somebody grieving, and how do you deal with that, and it being almost deadpan in its delivery or stilted in the style. This movie also kind of falls into one of my favorite subgenres, which is being stuck in a small town and having a hard time getting out of it. And it kind
Yeah.
of feels like that's part of, with the alien coming down, that, maybe this is him sort of referencing or creating a metaphor to COVID, or what we've been through, where the characters are quarantining and sequestering to this small community for a longer period of time than they should be there, and kind of just being stuck in a place that's basically just a way station. It's a place where people just roll into town, maybe have a pit stop, and then keep going. But to kind of live there and just be kind of stuck in this milieu for so long, and having these really smart children, or adolescents kind of conversing and trying to figure out a way to get out of it, and then the adults kind of dealing with their own baggage. You have people like Jason Schwartzman, who's a war photographer, who's very much modeled after a young Stanley Kubrick. You have Scarlett Johansson's actor, who looks almost like a spitting image of Elizabeth Taylor, and she even talks about one of her characters, or pardon me, one of the kids mentions Cleopatra, and Elizabeth Taylor won the Oscar for playing Cleopatra. So it's just interesting, those little kind of references to those things, or even Bad Day at Black Rock being an aesthetic reference, the Spencer Tracy movie, of being stuck in Western town and trying to get out of it, and not really knowing where the next day will lead you, other than that you're just kind of caught in kind of like a limbo. And I think like that's fascinating into itself, and how it draws other people in. Like you have the Tom Hanks character, who's the father-in-law to Jason Schwartzman, and we only see him first in that first act on the phone, and they're talking back and forth to each other, and it's an amazing conversation, because
Yeah.
it's the most honest thing you've ever heard, but at the same time it's delivered in that kind of Wes Anderson dialogue and dialect. And then Hanks's character doesn't come in till a little bit later, and the character work here, I think there's more.
Rupert Friend.
Oh my God, Rupert Friend in the Canadian tuxedo, who
Yeah.
plays in this kind of country style band, but then also, like, anytime Maya Hawke is teaching the children about maybe what they saw with the alien, or just giving them lessons, and he comes in, well, children, I gotta tell you about this. It's incredible, and it's so charming. It's very funny. I think I laughed more with this movie than most comedies in the last couple of years. And it just feels like The French Dispatch was a bit of a minor effort, but coming back to this, like, it's so rich in its production design. I really loved Edward Norton as the folksy
Yeah.
playwright, who, like, he talks about ice cream being cool and delicious. Talks like this, and it kind of has that Foghorn Leghorn kind of quality to it. So again, going to the Looney Tunes aspect of it all, or again, you get people like Jeff Goldblum or Willem Dafoe as like an acting teacher coming in and talking to the cast about it. And some people are more inclined, I think, to act as though they're behaving like a Wes Anderson character. And then there are other actors that are still funny and work within the context of a Wes Anderson film, but aren't necessarily pandering to Wes Anderson's aesthetic. I think someone like Matt Dillon as the local mechanic is so deadpan, but he's not necessarily doing it in that kind of quirky kind of way. He's just kind of like very matter of fact, but it's still very funny. And I think the one scene with Margot Robbie is very emotional, but also just poignant in how art and life kind of intermixes, but also at the same time it kind of, you can go on different paths, and it's just interesting getting insights from, the conversation that Jason Schwartzman has as the actor playing the role of the war correspondent with Margot Robbie, who was originally part of the cast, but her scenes were cut out and they only use a picture of her. But now she's in a production of what looks like a Mary Queen of Scots story, which was also
across the street.
yeah,
Right?
which is also very funny because she was in, the Mary Queen of Scots film with Saoirse Ronan not too long ago, and Saoirse Ronan is also a regular of Wes Anderson stuff as of late with Grand Budapest Hotel and French Dispatch. So there's just so much going on, and even just the aspect ratios and
I'm a fucking nerd for that stuff, and
the
that's
color
what
grading. Bryan
yeah.
Cranston, I think Bryan
Yeah.
Cranston in both Isle of Dogs and in this is fantastic. I think, like, I was never a big Breaking Bad fan, and I kind of felt like maybe he was a little bit overused and overhyped a little bit, but I liked him in Drive, and I liked him in Malcolm in the Middle. But watching how Anderson uses him in these two films, Isle of Dogs and this, there's a sense of humor and a playfulness, and that twee is kind of met with like a charm that I think has been missing in some of his films, and he gets the best use out of Cranston. And I just love
totally
the
agree.
idea of like when the story of the narrator blends into the production itself, and it's like, oh, am I even in this scene?
I'm not in the scene. Yeah. And that's what I'll focus on, because you nailed all the thematic stuff and production design and all that stuff. So I don't need to repeat anything, because I think you absolutely nailed that. But me, for being a nerd of thematically using aspect ratios and those framing devices, and like we can focus a little bit on that, because like I sort of mentioned it earlier in the spoiler free section. I kind of loved that approach of every time you would go into the play as it was being performed for the audience, it would switch to that 2:3:9 aspect ratio and be very cinematic looking, right? Like it's got that classic cinematic Wes Anderson look with that color, like that not washed out, but that kind of pastel-y kind of color grading and pop of color and symmetrical, I mean, the whole thing's symmetrical, but every frame is meticulously planned and blocked and everything like that. And then you kind of pan out and see the real world of where the actors are living their real lives in quotes, and that looks sort of like a play. It's framed in 4:3. It's in black and white. Every thing there doesn't have a huge production value. It looks like you're watching someone performing it on a stage, even with the audio that they use, and like the lighting and the minimalist kind of sets that are used. So it's this weird kind of reverse of like, okay, the real life looks like a stage play and is performed like a stage play, but then the actual stage play is performed to us like a film. And that to me was super interesting. And at any time that transition between the play and the real world, and having Bryan Cranston come in and deliver exposition and the narration and stuff like that, like I think just worked so beautifully. And yeah, he's just a master of that. I mean, the way that he uses aspect ratios in Grand Budapest Hotel, and I think switching aspect ratios can be done just as a, you know, just to be different, or just to kind of do something, it's being not overused. I think Trey Edward Schultz uses it super well in his movies, and they always feel like they have a thematic reason, whether it wants to make you feel claustrophobic or open up a frame. And like, I think that's like, it's being done a lot, but I don't think the actual, what Wes Anderson is super good at is using filmmaking as a thematic, device in his movies, which I don't think we see it. I guess maybe if people who really give a shit, any movie can be viewed that way in the filmmaking, and of having a deeper meaning than just setting up a shot for practical reasons, right? But I think Wes Anderson, whether it's in the editing or in the blocking of a scene, or in the, any element of the actual filmmaking, there's something thematically being told there too. And I think that, and he does that so well, and he's done that so well since, I mean, his whole career. But again, I think Fantastic Mr. Fox was that turning point for me where he went final form of Wes Anderson, right? Like, you know,
well, he's
like,
more
he's
controlled than I think he
yeah.
was when you go back and watch Bottle Rocket and Rushmore and Royal Tenenbaums. Even Life Aquatic, which starts to incorporate the animation of Henry Selick, it's like,
Yeah.
but it was maybe a little bit more looser, or there was a little bit more room for the actors to kind of, play within the lines that he's created, where this feels like we've gotten to that point now where everything is so controlled and drawn out to a point where the element of surprise is kind of lost, because there is the expectation of, okay, well, when you see a Wes Anderson movie, you're going to get these certain things in play thematically and aesthetically speaking. And when you're watching this, you're thinking, okay, well, what is this going to do that he hasn't done previously? Or is this just going to be something that connects with me? Because you're either going to like it or you're not. And I think even if you're a Wes Anderson fan, like, you can be in a mood where maybe you're not wanting to watch a Wes Anderson movie, and you could still like it if you rewatch it and just be in the right mindset for it. So when you're looking at something like this, I could see someone being like, oh, I didn't really care for it, but then revisiting it later on and being like, oh no, this really was something special. And again, like, I think there are some subtle performances and gestures in what Johansson's doing and what Tom Hanks is doing, and
Schwartzman having a good couple weeks too.
yeah, and I think, like, you look at him, like, he's next to Bill Murray and Owen Wilson and people like that. He's one of those long-term collaborators, and you can see the evolution of his career, being part of Anderson's kind of quartet or a marquee of filmmakers or actors, and working with these people again and again, even if it is just a smaller role, or a role that kind of feels maybe more like a punchline, like Jeff Goldblum does a little bit in this. It's telling that the actors really enjoy working with Anderson as a creative, and that he is one of those guys that over the last few years, he seems to have become more prolific. I think, like, after Isle of Dogs, even like with Dispatch, Asteroid City, he already has another movie that he shot for Netflix that's based on a
It's an
Roald Dahl
animated film, right?
Well,
Is it
it's a
stop
hybrid. It's a
motion or?
hybrid. So it's using
Okay.
16 millimeter film. And then he's working on another one apparently right now with Michael Cera. So, like, he's kind of gotten into this strange groove now where he's making movies it seems like every couple of years, where before that it was taking a little bit longer. And so maybe that will end up being like a Star Wars thing, where we talk about where maybe like
Too
the
much.
novelty will wear off.
Yeah.
But as of now, it's always nice to kind of jump back into the worlds he makes, because there's nothing really like them
That's
outside of
exactly
it.
it.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not sick of it. It's just like, even a minor work from Wes Anderson will be completely, no one's trying to mimic his style.
Well,
Really,
other than
right? Like,
AIs,
fuck those.
which I think, okay, this is the thing I really do want to say. If
Yeah.
you're a film reviewer and you're reviewing or talking about a Wes Anderson movie, please, for the love of Pete, do not say that. Even if you don't like it, that's fine. Don't say that this is just basically an AI, derivative version. It's not. Like, you watch this movie and then you
And
see
then see those
the AI
AI.
trailers. They're not even close to comparison.
No,
I'm
the
sorry.
AI looks like a robot who's trying to make
Yeah, it's lazy
sound.
film criticism. So whoever does that and says that, go back to square one. Sorry. I'm bothered by that.
I haven't seen. I
I have, and it's
I feel like
bothersome.
that's even lazy, because you just saw a couple AI Wes Anderson movies and you feel like all of his movies are cookie cutter. Even using the term cookie cutter is better than an AI version.
Yeah,
because like, you can make the argument that a lot of his movies, but
they're repetitive and they have that redundancy.
Sorry, that word that we want to use.
Yeah.
Like, any auteur has those things where all of their movies, feel similar, and sure that some feel more similar every movie than other filmmakers, but like, they all have their touchstones and the things that they like talking about and the aesthetic choices that they like using. For Anderson, it's a formula that works for him, and he's following that a little bit more and more each movie. But I feel like because no one else is making the types of movies he is, I buy fully into it, where I'm like, at least I know, even if I don't love it, like with French Dispatch, I'm getting a Wes Anderson movie through and through. And whether that's once a year, once every couple years, or once every 5 years, I'm open to that. Even if, yes, you know, it's going to have symmetrical blocking and framing, you know, it's going to feature these actors, you know, the dialogue is going to be deadpan and stilted, but have that certain, comedic sense. And that's either, again, going back to comedies, the most subjective thing. I don't know. I think to me that becomes more of a positive than a negative, but again, that goes back to the subjective, just your viewpoint on someone. So I feel like it's easy to say like all of his movies feel the same or are the same, and I'm like, yeah, but then that's kind of why you either like them or dislike them. So I mean, I guess both sides of it, I kind of, you know, I don't know what the hell
Yeah,
else
I
to
just think
say,
that
but
comparing it to like
to the
saying
AI
like,
thing is just because you saw a couple AI
yeah, it's
things online.
lazy. It's lazy criticism.
I just think those AI things is like, yes, maybe he's the easiest filmmaker to do one of those about, because he definitely has the most, like, I like the other post that being like, name literally any other filmmaker, like all these people online
Yeah,
being like,
and they could,
name someone else.
and
And it's
the
just like,
AI could replicate what that is. So
for Wes Anderson, I think he's in that very small crew of people that even if you don't watch his movies, you know what one of his movies looks like and you kind of know his name, right?
right.
Like for a guy that's not making blockbuster cinema, like that's very sort of rare. If I asked my parents who Wes Anderson was, I feel like they go, oh, I think I know that name, and would kind of maybe be able to describe his types of movies. And I don't know. And I think that's kind of a, like, good for him. He's able to have a style that is unique that people
All the
recognize. And
Andersons,
like,
Paul Thomas Anderson,
yeah,
Paul
WS,
W.S. Anderson.
they all are auteurs in their own way. Just
Yes.
3 very different auteurs. So anyways, like, yeah. And then I thought it was a blast. I really, every time that little Roadrunner popped up, I'm like, this is funny. The alien bit is hilarious. Again, while I don't necessarily think the emotional core of the movie, like there are some, like you mentioned, the Margot Robbie sequence that really works. Jason Schwartzman's conversations with Scarlett Johansson through the windows, I think do work at times. I do think in a lot of his movies, like, the emotional beats feel a little like his movies do feel artificial, right? But then I think that's intended. So I'm not upset that some of the, emotional stuff in the movies feels a little surface level, but I'm like, okay, I'm fine with it. Like, I still think it works. It's just maybe there's not a lot of, it's not super deep, and I'm okay with that. But I agree with you. Some of the newer cast members I think really worked. Who else do I want to point out that was really great that we haven't talked
Oh, we
about?
got to mention that
Um,
the casting of Jake Ryan, who plays Jason Schwartzman's son, is perfect. Like, he looks like a mini version of Jason Schwartzman, and a lot of people will recognize him from 8th Grade.
Okay.
He's the
Okay.
love interest that has all the packets of nugget sauce.
Really? Okay. That's great. I didn't clue in, but seeing Tony Revioli show up, and Hong Chau in a quick brief moment is great.
Jeffrey Wright,
Yeah,
pardon me.
Jeffrey Wright is great. So yeah, there's so many. The Rupert Friend, the musical sequence, I think is
Well,
is
let me
really
tell you
good.
something.
So it's just that kind of stuff, which I understand doesn't work for everyone, but I will continue to support this guy in anything he does, and I'm not going to love everything. Again, didn't love French Dispatch, didn't love Moonrise Kingdom, which is one that I think universally people really, really love. And I don't think I mentioned this in the spoiler free section. Grand Budapest Hotel, I absolutely love. I don't think this is quite on that level, but I still had a blast with it and had a really, really good time. So.
Yeah, and going back to the emotional thing, I do think there are elements that are very sincere, and like, the loss of somebody and the impact that has. Like, I think just showing the chair that Edward Norton's character worked in, and just
Yeah,
it being absent, I think like that is actually very powerful and very
fair.
subtle in what it's doing, but it doesn't feel artificial, because it's like, well, once you lose the person who created the thing to begin with, maybe that part of the story is over, and like that loss
That's fair.
you can't recover from. And like it's a very small thing, and it's like, again, it's just a chair, but it's a chair that had meaning to the person who sat in it for hours on end, writing and rewriting and contemplating their whole existence while writing it. And those kind of aspects I really do feel mean something. And then there's also, mentioning more references, the song that's in Mars Attacks that blows up all the aliens' brains.
Yeah,
Slim
you mentioned
Whitman's
that. Yeah.
Indian Love Call is the name of the song from 1952, is in this movie. Now, it doesn't play a pivotal role like it does in Mars Attacks, but when you hear it, you will notice that song. Like it's so distinct because of that yodel,
That's a
that
fun
folksy
nod, yeah.
yodel. So it has to be intentional that they are referencing that, or the period in which kind of sci-fi and alien invasion stuff was kind of taking America by storm, because this was a point where UFOs and Mars attacks and aliens attacking were kind of big, with the Area 51 and stuff like that, and even setting it in that desert like landscape kind of pays tribute to that stuff. So there's a lot going on here that I think you could get even more out of a second or third watch, just focusing in on like one of the framing devices and following that along, or focusing in on the production design specifically, or just one of the actors, especially if there's one actor or someone like you see in multiple versions, because you're seeing the actor playing the part, but then you're seeing just the actor, but then you're also realizing, well, the actor is playing an actor who is an actor.
Yeah.
So that kind of like, again, that weird like inverse Christopher Nolan kind of layer thing. Like it, if you're a Nolan fan, I wouldn't be surprised if you want to give this a chance, because it does have that kind of same weirdness. It's not as cerebral. It's more, as you mentioned, twee than it is
Sure.
that way, but it still has that artificial quality. And again, Nolan's a guy that's very much similar with that kind of austere filmmaker type that has a very distinct style. And I think anybody that does can be polarizing. It's just, you either like their
That's
work
natural.
or you
Yeah.
don't. We've talked about Baz Luhrmann. We're not fans of his, but we
But
understand.
I'll take those types of filmmakers over middle of the road kind
Yeah.
of, nothing movies, right? Love them or hate them stuff, I think, is more interesting. Him or her, they, but like, love M, I meant EM, or hate him. Yeah, I'll take that any day of the week, right? Yeah, Baz Luhrmann is a perfect kind of person to bring up, who, in a much different way, has their very distinct style that's a little bit, is very in your face, much like Anderson is, but in a different way, right? And that Baz Luhrmann, for me and you, I think for me, there are a couple moments from Baz Luhrmann that I don't mind, and I appreciate him unabashedly being him. So even if it doesn't work for me, like,
same. I'm not a fan of his movies, but I can understand why people like his films, and I'm glad he's making the movies he wants to make. And he's more aggressive than Wes Anderson is, but Wes Anderson is still passive aggressive with his filmmaking and
that's
his
a great
aesthetic.
way to describe
Yeah, because I think he's like, I
They're
think
like
Baz
the mirror
Luhrmann.
versions of each
Yeah,
other,
Baz
but
Luhrmann
like,
is trying to like literally like punch you in the face while you're watching the movie, where Wes Anderson's like every once in a while, giving you a left hook. And so when you're watching, anybody that has a true vision, it's just fascinating to think about, like, okay, well, why do those movies work so well? And then when people try to imitate or copy them, whether it be an AI generated trailer or another filmmaker I mean, it was the same thing with Tarantino, where after Pulp Fiction, you had a bunch of filmmakers who were coming out of film school trying to emulate and remake or capture lightning in a bottle the way Tarantino did. But just because you can, take the lyrics and write them, the way that you think they work, it doesn't mean that you're going to conduct them the same way. It's the individual that makes the piece work as a whole. And obviously they need the collaboration of everybody else to make it work and come together. But there is a reason why Wes Anderson movies are the way they are, and not simply just like someone can recreate them the way that, an AI vision has done, so to speak. And it's just weird with that stuff. But going back to this film, I think it is one of his best movies, and I think it's just one of his most fun.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna give the movie a 4.5. I really, really liked it. like Grand Budapest is that 5-star movie for me. I love Isle of Dogs. I love Fantastic Mr. Fox, but this is right up there with those movies. And he is a guy for me that keeps making better and better stuff because I like him leaning into his aesthetic and unabashedly being like, this is me. These are the types of movies you're going to get. And no other person is making them like that. So I'm going to give the movie a 4.5.
I'm also giving it a 4.5 out of 5. And I just think it's a fun movie, and it's a perfect summer film in a lot of ways. Like, it's just like it kind of has that, even though it's pastel and colorful and cool looking, it still has the heat. It still has kind of the artifice of a summer blockbuster. Like, it's just funny.
Never overstays its welcome.
No, it doesn't. Like, it's short. Like, it doesn't.
Very short, actually.
Yeah. But it's just fascinating seeing like a sci-fi movie through the eyes of a Wes Anderson. And like thinking to yourself, okay, well, what other filmmakers could tackle a certain genre and do it their way that you would like to see in their interpretation of it.
It's, if you talk about those other auteurs we've talked about, right? We've always go, what would a Tarantino kids movie look like, or comedy, right? Like, or I guess his movies have comedy, right? But like, yeah, you take those different filmmakers and go, they've done one thing a lot, right? But like, if they did something, not that sci-fi is completely different, but just something that they haven't tackled yet. And I think seeing that here, he definitely did it in the most Wes Anderson way, which I think is awesome. Like that, again, I'll that one moment of the alien coming out will be, I think, is something I will definitely remember by the end of the year, right? So
yeah.
It's just,
and one of the best uses
great.
of like special effects in a film. We talk a lot about VFX and how it takes you out of the movie because it's just not realistic looking, where this isn't realistic looking, but it still works because it's just it's from another time. Like, that animation style is so removed from what we're used to nowadays that it feels charming and refreshing bringing it back. And so with that, I think it adds this other layer of being memorable, because again, like, you watch all this CGI sludge that we've seen. I mean, when we were talking about Transformers Rise of the Beast, like, there's nothing in that movie that particularly stands out. I think last year we got a little bit of sort of another sci-fi alien movie with Nope. Like, Jordan Peele and Wes Anderson are guys that take
this would be a great double feature, dude.
Yeah, they're taking the genre but subverting it in their own weird ways, and they're adding texture to the production design. The way that Jean Jacket is memorable and will, I think, continue to be memorable in the years to come, and how we look at an alien spacecraft, or if it is an alien spacecraft, it might just be the alien itself. And then with this, the way that we see the alien, like, it's just it's something that you will remember, where most blockbusters playing in sci-fi or horror or action, after a while you just become numb to it.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you all for listening or watching. We really, really do appreciate it. We're back in full force. We have reviews for movies like Transformers Rise of the Beasts, like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Like, what else have we done, Eric? I'm blanking already. Didn't we just record something before
we
this?
did Transformers Rise of the Beast. We have
Elemental.
That's so memorable. Elemental.
Yeah, so all of that stuff should be available for you guys to listen to right now, and then we'll also maybe have The Flash. It's a big week for us, so there's a ton of stuff. Past lives maybe as well. We might spread all this stuff out a little bit, but that's
it's some of this is coming out in limited release, like Asteroid City. So if it's not out, if it's not in your city the first week of release, don't worry, because it does take some time for these smaller films to make their way over.
And other than that, as always, my name's Matt Rober. Oh, Letterbox is what I keep forgetting to plug. Damn it. I know we've been rusty. I've left out the Letterbox section of most of these reviews. Yeah, go over to our Letterbox, which is Untitled_Movies. You can get all of those aforementioned reviews, as well as all of our episodes and ratings and different things like that over on Untitled_Movies on Letterbox. But then, as always, you can follow all of my work around the internet, Family Feud Canada, untitledmoviepodcast.com, and all of my nonsense over on Twitter at Matt Rohrbeck.
And you can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on all the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Meet.